Hello everyone, now we step into a scene so ordinary it might escape notice, until one pair of boots rewrites the entire room. A fluorescent-lit DMV office. Buzzing lights. Coughing. Paper shuffling. The quiet hum of mild frustration fills the space like static, and then in walks a man with sun-leathered skin, a denim jacket worn soft by years of use, and boots that told stories whether anyone listened or not. But this room, this crowd, they didn't listen. Not at first. You probably won't survive this, at least not with your judgmental instincts intact, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where and when these stories reach you. Now, relax, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get into today's story. You stand behind him in line. Fourth from the front. He's second. He's quiet. He doesn't scroll through his phone. He doesn't mutter complaints. He stands tall, too tall, maybe, back slightly arched as if his bones still remember a flak jacket. The woman behind the counter glances at his paperwork, then her eyes slide downward. You notice the shift in her posture, the flash of judgment she doesn't even try to hide. She squints. You couldn't wear something a little more presentable? That's when you hear the snickers from two teenagers seated off to the side. One elbows the other and mumbles loud enough for half the room to catch it. Bet those boots haven't been cleaned since Nam. Another voice, older, sharper, joins in, or maybe he just crawled out from under a tractor. Still, he doesn't move. Doesn't respond. Just adjusts the papers in his hand and waits. The laughter spreads. The woman behind the counter looks like she's trying not to smile. Someone mutters, probably smells like diesel and shame. You feel it building. That familiar discomfort. The kind that wants to crawl out of your skin because the world around you is acting ugly, and your silence makes you complicit, but then, everything stops. It's not because he speaks. He doesn't. Not yet. It's because of what falls out from his jacket pocket as he steps forward, a folded patch. Desert camo. Edges singed, the woman sees it first. Her mouth opens just slightly. A breath, maybe. You notice her glance quickly at the badge on her desk. It reads Lisa. Her hand hovers in midair for a beat too long, still silence. The room has turned. Faces shift from cruel amusement to confusion. You can see them now, the details, the scarring on his knuckles. The threadbare stitching of his jacket, the edge of a dog tag chain peeking beneath his collar. Then he finally speaks, barely a whisper. Just need to renew my license. Don't want trouble. And with those 9 words, the room feels like it's choking on guilt. You realize something. People didn't see a man. They saw boots. And from those, they assumed weakness, neglect, or irrelevance. They didn't know the boots had melted rubber near the toes from one hellish summer in Iraq. They didn't know the soles still carried dust from Kandahar. They didn't know that those boots had once been left in a hospital room by a nurse who didn't realize the man wearing them had just saved lives while half burned himself. But in that DMV, nobody knew. Not yet. There's a rule of thumb, passed around among infantry grunts and corpsmen: don't trust a man with perfect boots. You see, shiny leather might look good for inspection, but in the field? In the blood and the chaos? It's the scuffed-up, steel-toe, soul-bearing boots that earn respect, and now here he is, waiting patiently, battered boots planted firm. One woman suddenly clears her throat awkwardly and looks down at her shoes. Another young man behind you closes the game he's playing on his phone. The room has shifted. Slightly. Uneasily. But shifted, he moves forward to the counter. Lisa, the clerk, adjusts her posture. Her face softens, but she's clearly trying to navigate the strange air she helped create. "Thank you for waiting," she says. Not exactly an apology. But not cold, either. He gives her a polite nod. "No worries, ma'am. I've waited in worse lines." That line, so simple, lands heavy. Because none of you in that room, including yourself, have waited for hours under mortar fire just to get clearance out of a kill zone. None of you have stood for hours under a searing sun next to a convoy that wouldn't stop catching fire. None of you have stood between life and death. 9 times, in one afternoon, but he has. He collects his paperwork. Turns. Begins to leave. And as he passes the 2 teens, neither of them says a word. One even looks down, ashamed, but it's what happens next that marks the real shift. A small boy, maybe 8, maybe 9, tugs at his mother's sleeve near the back of the room. "Mom," he says, not quietly, "why were those people laughing at that soldier?" The mom freezes. The question hovers, unanswered, sharp as a bayonet. No one in the DMV speaks for several seconds. Not the teens. Not Lisa. Not even the man in the boots. He simply nods politely at the boy, offers a soft, "Have a good one," and walks out the door, and just like that. The moment passes, but not for you. For you, it's just beginning. You step forward, knowing you won't forget those boots, or the silence they left behind. You can't get those boots out of your mind. Hours later, driving home, the image of them haunts you, their cracked leather, the burned toe, the way they held a man's whole history with quiet dignity. You think of the snickers in the DMV, the way people shrugged off another human being like he was a punchline in a meme. And you start to wonder, who was he? Where had he come from? What had those boots seen? You don't have to wait long to find out, because 2 days later, while scrolling through the local newspaper's online crime blotter, something you do out of mild curiosity and way too much caffeine, you find a small human interest piece buried near the bottom. The headline is simple: "Veteran honored quietly for heroism overseas." There's a photo, same jacket, same boots, but this time he's in front of a VFW hall, shaking hands with a local congressman. The article is short, just under 300 words. But it hits you like a freight train. His name is Marvin Hale. Retired Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army. 2 tours in Iraq. Bronze Star with Valor. Pulled 9 soldiers from a burning convoy in Anbar province during an ambush. Suffered second-degree burns to his hands and neck. Refused evacuation until the last man was accounted for. You read it twice. Then 3 times, and then you do something you didn't expect. You drive back to the DMV. Not to complain. Not to stir anything up. But to ask Lisa a question. She remembers him. Of course. Her eyes shift as she acknowledges the incident. "I didn't know," she says. "None of us knew." You nod, and something sharp presses against your chest. "But we judged him anyway." Lisa doesn't respond to that, but what she does say sticks with you. You know, the worst part is, he wasn't angry. Not even a little. Like he'd seen worse. Like our pettiness didn't even scratch the surface. You leave quietly. That night, you fall down the rabbit hole. You search Marvin Hale's name. You find a few old military blog posts, a couple of commendation photos, and finally, buried in a YouTube account with less than 200 followers, a grainy helmet cam video taken on the day he earned his Bronze Star. You almost don't want to watch it. But you do. It starts with shouting. Sand in the lens. Chaos. A voice yells, "We're hit. We're hit." You can hear the panic. Gunfire. Smoke. A vehicle on fire, and then, out of frame, Marvin's voice cuts through the noise. Calm. Controlled. Move. Move. I've got Brooks. Somebody get Sanchez. You can't see his face, but you can feel his command. You watch as he drags limp bodies from a flaming truck. One after another. His arms are covered in burns. Someone tries to pull him away, but he waves them off. Get back to the line. I'll finish this. And he does. 9 men pulled from that wreck. One by one. While enemy fire cracked overhead. While the whole world seemed to be coming apart, you pause the video. You stare at the boots, his boots, running through fire. Suddenly, the DMV seems like a different planet. You want to do something. Say something. But what? You start small. You return to the DMV the next morning. You bring 24 donuts and a copy of the article about Marvin. You place them on the front counter and say, for the veteran who deserved better. Lisa reads it in silence. The others do too. There's a strange stillness. A wait, and then the young man who laughed the loudest that day, he's standing near the back, walks up, looking pale. I didn't know, he says, nobody did. But now. Now they do. Over the next few days, something starts happening in town. Quietly. Subtly. An elementary school teacher assigns her 5th grade class a project on local veterans. A diner near the edge of town puts up a sign, free coffee for those who've worn boots in service. A teenager paints a mural behind the high school, a pair of battered combat boots standing in a field of sand, with the words, respect is earned, not assumed, and in the middle of it all, Marvin. He just keeps going. Still wears that same jacket. Still shops at the same hardware store. Still walks his dog down Main Street like he's not the reason a bunch of strangers are questioning everything they thought they knew about appearances. One day, you finally get the nerve to approach him. He's sitting alone on a bench, sipping coffee from a thermos. You sit beside him. Not too close. You nod, and after a few seconds, he nods back. Mr. Hale, you say. Just Marvin, he replies. You tell him about the DMV. About how the town's changing. About how people are seeing things, him, differently now. He listens. Quietly. Then he says something you don't expect. I wasn't mad, you know. People laugh at what they don't understand. I just figured I'd walked through worse than words. You want to apologize. You want to thank him. You want to say something that matters, but instead, you just sit there beside him, and for a long time. Neither of you says another word, because sometimes, the silence speaks louder than boots ever could. Later that week, you hear about a gathering happening at the community center, a sort of informal veterans appreciation event, organized by a local high school senior named Elise. You don't usually go to things like this, but something about Marvin's story has rewired something inside you. So, you show up. Not for the speeches, not for the cookies, but to watch, and it's packed. People from all parts of town are there, some in faded marine caps, some in wheelchairs, others with canes or prosthetic legs, all just mingling like it's Sunday church. In the corner stands Marvin. Same jacket. Same boots. Like he's still walking through dust storms and flack fields even when the floor is just polished linoleum. But tonight, there's something different about him. A slight ease in his posture. A softness in the way he smiles at kids running past his legs. You stay in the back. Watch him talk to Elise, the high schooler who pulled this whole event together after reading about Marvin online. She tells him about her granddad, served in Vietnam, never talked about it. Died before she was born. But she says learning about Marvin made her feel connected to that past in a way she never had before. And Marvin? He listens. Nods. And then says, "Tell your granddad I said thanks anyway." She tears up. Later, a local journalist from the town's community cable station asks Marvin for a short interview. He declines, politely. Says the boots did the work, not him. When asked if he'd like to say anything to young people watching, he says this: "We're what you've earned. Even if it's cracked and scuffed. People might laugh at it, but that's because they haven't lived enough yet." You watch the clip later that night, and something inside you shifts permanently. You start seeing boots everywhere, not just on Marvin. On the guy who works nights at the gas station, turns out he was in the 82nd Airborne. On the old woman who walks laps at the park every morning, she served in the Coast Guard and kept 3 sailors from drowning during a hurricane rescue. On the school janitor, the guy people mostly ignore, he lost his left ear in a Humvee blast. You wonder how many more are walking right past you every day, wearing their scars like normalcy. And you start realizing that your education is just beginning. One story leads to another, like the story of Luis Ortega. Everyone in town knew him as the gruff mechanic who never smiled. He always wore the same flannel shirt, and people joked that he could fix anything except his bad attitude. What most didn't know: Luis once crawled under an overturned striker in Afghanistan, while it teetered on a cliff edge, to cut a friend free from a jammed harness. His flannel hid shrapnel scars that still turned red in the winter. He never talked about it, or Miss Pruitt, the librarian who insisted on silence like it was a sacred law. She never married, never left town. You discover she ran radio comms for the Navy in the 1970s, decoding encrypted transmissions during the Cold War. She used to have nightmares about numbers. Now she shelves books by Dewey Decimal and keeps war poetry in her bottom drawer. Each veteran holds a volume. Not always of fire and blood, but of sacrifice. Of something given up that the rest of us take for granted. Marvin's boots are the key that unlocks all of that, and when you finally ask him, months later, over coffee at the park, why he still wears those burned, scuffed, broken boots instead of getting a new pair, he chuckles. "These boots," he says, patting them like an old friend, "walked me out of hell. Why would I throw them away just 'cause they're ugly?" Then, he leans back and sips his drink, adding, "Besides, they remind me who I was. And who I still am." You don't reply. You don't need to. But from that moment on, every time you see someone in worn-out shoes, or a scuffed jacket, or eyes that have clearly seen too much and not said enough, you pause, you look again, you consider the weight behind the silence, and you learn to ask better questions. Questions like, what did you give up to stand here now? What have you carried for years that the rest of us can't even imagine? And most importantly, are we the kind of people worthy of the peace you bought, back at the community center? Marvin begins to leave. A few people clap. Some shake his hand. One little boy with a crooked smile salutes, too excited to do it right. Marvin salutes back, perfectly. You catch up to him in the parking lot. Just to say thanks. But he waves it off. "Don't thank me," he says, "just see us." And you do, you finally do. You see Marvin less after that. He's still around, still at the market on Thursdays, still at the park on Sunday mornings, but something changes. You're not sure if it's him or if it's you. Maybe both. You've started noticing the other veterans around town more vividly now. There's a subtle brotherhood in the way they nod to each other across a crowded room, like an invisible language you're only now beginning to understand. One morning, you're waiting in line at the post office, behind a man who's clearly had a rough day. His hands shake as he tries to fill out a shipping label. The clerk is impatient. You offer to help, and he nods gratefully. His handwriting is nearly illegible. And his clothes smell faintly of diesel and something else, maybe motor oil, maybe memories. He doesn't say much until you mention Marvin. That's when he stops, stares, and mutters, "That man saved my brother's life in Iraq." You pause. That hadn't come up before. Marvin had only ever mentioned his unit vaguely, and never by name. "Was your brother one of the 9? The man nods. "Yeah. Back then, they called Marvin the Mule. Carried every man he could, wouldn't let medics near him until the others were out first." You finally get the package mailed for him. But the story stays with you, and suddenly, you're back at that DMV in your mind, watching those teenagers laugh. Watching Marvin stand silently in his boots. But now, those boots are no longer worn leather. They're made of something else entirely, something unbreakable, like memory hardened into armor. You begin digging. You search old service records. You find a dusty article archived in a regional paper, Sergeant Marvin Cross commended for heroism after convoy ambush. There's a blurry photo of him younger, but unmistakably the same man. He's holding an M4. Covered in ash. Half his face is hidden by the shadow of his helmet. The article describes how Marvin ignored a direct order to evacuate, choosing instead to return again and again to a burning convoy, pulling out wounded men under fire, 9 in total. Some alive because of sheer muscle. Some because Marvin knew exactly how to find them, even through smoke and fire. And at the very end, just before the last vehicle exploded, Marvin went back in again. This time, for a man already dead. Why? The article quoted a medic asking. Marvin's reply was short, "Because no man gets left to burn." You read that part twice, and that's when it hits you, not just the horror of what he saw, but the weight he's carried every single day since. The boots weren't worn down by walking, they were worn down by carrying others. Carrying memories. Carrying pain so the rest of us could be oblivious and comfortable, and that's what made the laughter at the DMV so unforgivable, not because it was cruel, but because it was blind to the truth right in front of it. You share the article. First on social media. Then with the local news. Then with the city council. You want people to know, you want everyone who ever passed Marvin by without a second glance to see him, really see him, for the first time. The story takes off. Within days, Marvin's name is trending locally. People are reposting the archived article, adding memories, posting photos of him they'd taken over the years, at parades, at school assemblies, even just sitting quietly by the lake with a thermos. Someone paints a mural on the wall behind the community center, a pair of tattered boots under a rising sun, with the words, "Worn for others." Still, Marvin says nothing. But you notice one morning, when you walk past his house, that someone has replaced his broken porch steps. Quietly. Without asking. Another day, a veteran-owned boot company sends him a new pair, custom-made, military grade, engraved with the names of his unit. He keeps them by the door, untouched, but the old boots. Still on his feet. Then something extraordinary happens. One cold Tuesday morning, as Marvin walks toward the market, something unusual occurs. One of the teenagers from the DMV, the one who had laughed the loudest, crosses the street and stops in front of him. He's wearing jeans now, a little taller, a little quieter. He says nothing at first, then he stares at Marvin's boots. And finally mutters, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." Marvin looks at him for a long second, then says, "You don't have to know everything. Just don't laugh at what you haven't lived." The boy nods. No excuses. Just an honest, bone-deep understanding that will change the way he treats strangers forever, and that is the turning point for the town. Suddenly, people aren't just grateful, they're attentive. when a man in a wheelchair struggles with the curb at the grocery store, 3 people rush to help without hesitation. When a woman with a service dog is denied a cab, someone starts a petition that gets signed by hundreds. The community, in learning Marvin's story, begins seeing the hundreds of others like him who'd been invisible for years. And Marvin, he walks a little slower now, but you know he's watching, just like he always did, quietly carrying us forward, one scuffed boot step at a time. You get a call one morning you weren't expecting. It's from a woman named Lillian Cross, Marvin's niece. Her voice is gentle, deliberate, like someone used to weighing words before releasing them. She says she found your number from the local paper's story, the one you'd helped push into the public's eye. Uncle Marvin, she begins, he passed this morning. And just like that, it feels like the wind is knocked out of you. She tells you it was peaceful. He went in his sleep. Boots by the bedside, of course. The same pair. The only pair. His hand resting on a folded flag he kept for decades. No funeral has been scheduled yet. No plans for a big memorial. He was never much for ceremony. She says, but you know that can't be how it ends. The next few hours blur into motion. Calls. Emails. Conversations with veterans, students, council members, store owners, everyone who had crossed paths with Marvin in one way or another. The response is overwhelming. What begins as a quiet wake at the community center quickly swells into something else entirely. The city blocks off Main Street that Friday, not for a parade, but for Marvin. Hundreds gather, some in uniform, some in boots, some just holding little hand-painted signs that say things like "Thank you for walking ahead of us" and "The boots mattered." The local high school band plays taps, imperfectly, but no one seems to care. The air is heavy with silence and respect, and then something no one quite expected, the sound of boots, not Marvin's. Dozens of veterans, old and young, begin walking in unison down the center of the street, boots thudding against the pavement in a slow, somber rhythm. Each pair different. Some pristine. Some held together by duct tape and memory. But all of them marching for the man who carried them in spirit. Then, they stop in front of the mural, the one with the boots under the rising sun, and lay down their own boots, one by one, in a growing line. A silent tribute. You approach the mic at the front. You didn't plan to speak. But you feel like you must. You look out over the crowd, at the faces, some tearful, some unreadable, and say, when Marvin walked into the DMV that day, none of us knew who he was. But we know now. And we will not forget. And then, almost as an afterthought, you hold up a copy of the old article, the one where Marvin pulled 9 men from the fire, and say, he didn't want us to see him as a hero. He wanted us to see each other better. There's not much applause, just nods, quiet nods from those who understand that true service often happens in silence, and that the loudest things aren't said, but carried, in the following weeks. Something shifts in the town's heartbeat. The DMV hires a local vet to give a short welcome and respect presentation at orientation days. The public library creates a section dedicated to stories from service members, curated by veterans themselves. School kids start writing letters to living vets, asking questions, not just about war, but about what it means to return. And then there's the Boots Project. It begins with a simple bench, carved with Marvin's name, placed right outside the grocery store. But within a month, people start leaving old boots next to it. Every pair comes with a note. Some thank Marvin. Some tell stories of uncles, brothers, mothers who served. Some just say, I get it now. Eventually, the bench becomes a full memorial. It isn't flashy. It doesn't have a marble statue or eternal flame, just a pile of worn-out boots. A little plaque that reads, he carried others so they could rest, and there's something about that simplicity that makes you stop every time you pass by. You start seeing Marvin in little moments. A man giving up his seat on a bus for an old Marine with a cane. A woman paying for a stranger's coffee when she notices a bronze star on his hat. A kid stopping his soccer game to salute during the national anthem, not because he was told to, but because something deep down told him it mattered. You still visit the mural sometimes. You bring coffee and just sit on the curb, watching people come and go. No one knows you were the one who pulled that article from the archives. Or that you started the ripple. That's fine. That's the way Marvin would have liked it, but every now and then, someone will sit next to you, see the mural, and whisper. Who was that? And you'll smile and answer, a man whose boots you would have mocked if you didn't know better. A man who saved 9 lives with nothing but muscle, grit, and the will to not let anyone burn alone. A man who taught us that kindness doesn't need fanfare. Just strong steps forward. And that, more than any plaque or parade, is his legacy, because Marvin didn't just leave footprints, he left direction. The street is quiet now, just a few leaves drifting along the curb, the distant hum of a lawnmower 2 blocks over, and a faint creak of the memorial bench outside the store, empty for now, but never for long. You can almost hear the sound of boots again. Not stomping. Not marching. Just steady. Measured. Like someone heading home after a long day carrying the weight of others, and maybe that's what Marvin was always trying to show us, not the glory, not the medals, but the quiet strength it takes to live each day with dignity. To serve without expecting applause. To endure without asking the world to notice. He didn't need us to clap, he needed us to look, to see the worn-out boots. The stiff backs, the old scars, and understand what they meant. Not pity. Not worship. Just recognition, and so, as you sit there now, hearing the wind rustle through the leaves, you feel something shift inside you, a slower breath, a softer posture, a little more patience for the next person you meet who walks like they've seen things they don't talk about. That's how legacies survive, not in loud headlines, but in quiet choices. So, wherever you are right now, maybe at work, maybe driving, maybe just sitting still, I hope Marvin's story reminds you that everyone you meet is carrying something. And sometimes, the best thing we can do is simply not add to the weight. Now go gently. Friend, and if you happen to pass a veteran today, look down, check the boots, and remember.